What's a family secret you didn't get told until you were older that made things finally make sense? My sister and I both got UTIs at the same time when our family was staying at our grandparents' house. One day my grandma took both of us aside and started what felt like an interrogation about whether any adults had touched us. Like, if something happened, you have to tell me right now. At the time, I felt gross, confused, and guilty, even though nothing had happened. It was just too intense. I later learned that my grandma had been sexually abused by her brother for years and her mother refused to believe her. Good for her for looking out for you though. A family my girl had known her whole life had a similar situation with a brother molesting their young daughter. The mum had brought it up in conversation like it was nothing and seemed normal to her. It wasn't normal to me. I felt guilty for many years since literally ripped our family apart, but we reported it to CPS the next day. Long story short, the daughter was removed from home and adopted to a new loving family. The son went to juvenile detention and just recently got out when he turned 18. The mum did jail time and is now a felon. The dad lost all rights to both kids and just vanished. I know I did the right thing and the little girl has a way better life now, but it's a lot knowing you changed so many people's lives for the best, but in the worst way. Was told my aunt and uncle died because of a carbon monoxide leak in their house. When I was 16 I was told the truth. My uncle was having serious money problems. He shot my aunt and then hung himself. Same with mine, but it turns out she caught him raping their young daughter. He shot her then shot himself afterward. Holy it. What happened to the daughter? My pet rabbit got attacked by something a couple years after I got it. My parents found it dead and replaced it before I found out. I just thought my rabbit lived super long, but it was actually 2 rabbits. This happened over 10 years ago and I found out last year. I didn't know one of my cousins existed until I was about 10 years old. Turns out he was diagnosed with leukemia as a child and I was a very sensitive kid. So my family decided not to tell me until the treatment was successful and he recovered. It would have been okay if they told me as soon as he was healthy again, but I guess they forgot, so the first time I met him, I was wondering how exactly I managed to forget the existence of a whole person. I thought that was going to end with your cousin passing away, and they just let you go on not knowing about them. But damn, they survived and just didn't mention it. From my father's family line. My great-grandfather killed my great-grandmother with an axe while she was sleeping. My grandma, who was the oldest one, raised all of her siblings. She was 19 at the time and just married my granddad, who was 19 too. Youngest sister was just 2 years old. They were 9 in total. I knew my grandma raised all her siblings, but I always thought it was because her mother died from some illness. I just found out when I was 17 and asked my aunt. My great-great-grandmother was 8 months pregnant and milking a cow. Cow got upset and kicked her in the head, killing her and the baby. The oldest daughter of the family basically became the mum, too. And there were also so many kids ranging from I think to 17. It's crazy to think about. I can't imagine having to do that. My aunt and uncle, who passed away when I was 11, were drug addicts. I adored them. But as I got older I started seeing less and less of them and never understood why. My parents briefly told me when I was 16 and that my uncle didn't die of a brain tumor, actually had one though, but instead he shot himself while my aunt was in the other room, which led to my aunt's drug-related death on New Year's Day. They finally told me the whole story when I was 21. I was the last person to know. Even my little brother knew before me, because I was extremely close to them and looked so highly of them. I still do. I wish I would have known sooner, but I understand why they didn't tell me. My father always talked about how his brother lied to a doctor so he could get on disability. I thought it was so easy for anyone to get a disability check. All you had to do was tell your doctor you were abducted by aliens. Years later, my father had a mental breakdown. He started telling stories about the government implanting a chip in his brain. He went out and got a CAT scan as proof, and he would point to things that weren't there. My dad was diagnosed as a schizophrenic, and years later, he started collecting a disability check because he couldn't hold a job. Kind of hard to perform any job when every conversation, including interviews, veers into the government trying to frick me in the ass. As an adult, It dawned on me when my aunt mentioned mental illness runs in the family. My uncle had never lied to his doctor. He told that doctor what he believed to be the absolute truth. He had been abducted by aliens. Whoa, it's kind of crazy how your dad just never believed your uncle at all. Does mental illness run in a particular side of your family? I know men can be more prone to schizophrenia, but I know in my family the anxiety runs in my mom's side and the depression my dad's. My dad denies it though. Yeah, anxiety runs deep on my mom's side of the family. It took me a long time to realize my anxiety was a clinical issue, because in my childhood every woman I spent large amounts of time with exhibited the same behavior. Definitely some denial there too. Man, that doctor is gonna feel like an idiot when we finally discover proof of alien life. That my granny attempted suicide when my mum was in high school. My mum was the one that found her. Luckily she did find her, because if she hadn't she wouldn't have survived. It explains why my mum panics the way she does and jumps to conclusions all the time. If she can't get a hold of me or my brother on the phone she automatically assumes we are dead and she panics. Recently, she couldn't get a hold of my brother for a few hours and she lost all composure and had a nervous breakdown. We just are starting to realize after all these years that she probably has undiagnosed PTSD. I've had the misfortune of finding a couple of dead people in my house. One was a friend and the other was a roommate a few years later, and I jumped to weird, panicky conclusions too. If my so's phone dies, I immediately assume he's dead. Or a thought will creep in, like that someone I'm saying goodbye to could get hit by a bus when they leave, and I get all worked up over it. It's gotten better over the years, but stuff like that can definitely do a number on you. I hope your mum is able to find some peace with it. That a huge number of my relatives on my dad's side have killed themselves. My brother, grandfather, 4 cousins, 1 uncle, and 5 great uncles. And of those remaining most have schizophrenia. There are usually only 1 or 2 people per generation that don't kill themselves or need medication or need to be put away. This was a big unspoken family secret. Both my mum and I had no idea until my brother killed himself. Does it affect predominantly men in your family? Seems like you listed almost exclusively male relatives, except cousins. Schizophrenia is more common in males and can have genetic significance, so it seems on point. Got me digging into my family tree, just mother's side, and I saw a staggering history of mental illness, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, etc., among other things. Now it makes sense why probably 70-ish% of the family I actually know have histories of drug abuse, criminal behavior, and the occasional suicide attempt, or success. Could it be called that? I don't know. Now I'm sitting here worried as I enter my early 20s, the supposed time when mental illness emerges. Why did I get on Reddit tonight, lol? My grandma remarried when my mum was a toddler. Turns out that bio dad was cheating on grandma with her best friend, resulting in a child and a divorce. He recently passed away after having no contact with her since he left grandma. Turns out our family was his secret family that his current family never knew about. He also mentioned that it's very likely my mum has a couple dozen half siblings in Vietnam. Also, he left all his money to his favorite prostitutes in his will. Damn, he got some priorities. Now that's what you call a real it lord. I'm sorry, a couple dozen? My grandfather did not die of a heart attack in the garage. My grandmother accidentally hit him with the car. I never knew why my grandmother refused to drive anywhere and preferred walking. That my grandfather raped my grandmother and that's how she conceived my dad. He used to beat my dad unconscious when my dad was as young as 5 years old and my grandmother did nothing about it. My grandmother then finally left my grandfather only to be with an alcoholic pedophile who actually abused young boys in church. She has great taste in men. Explains why my grandmother and father had a strained relationship and why one Christmas my step-grandfather was covered in bruises. He said he had a fall, but when everything came out about his past, it was actually because a young boy who he'd abused tracked him down years later and beat the living it out of him. Last year, I found out my dad isn't actually my biological father. He got my sisters and me those ancestry DNA kits for Christmas to do for fun as a family, and once we got the results, it showed he wasn't my biological father. The fricked up thing is my mum knew the whole time and never told anyone. For 26 years she kept this a secret and never had any intention of telling the truth. When I confronted her about it, she denied and then once I showed her the results, she finally confessed. She'd had an affair with her college boyfriend while my dad was on a business trip for a couple months. After I found all of this out, things finally started making sense. Her and I have never had a great relationship. I always envied other girls growing up that had great mother/daughter relationships and never understood why that couldn't be me. She was very verbally and sometimes physically abusive towards me growing up, but never towards my sisters. She knew I was the product of her affair and she was ashamed, so she would take it out on me. I was always told I was 6 weeks premature, but now I know she was lying so she could keep her timeline straight so my dad wouldn't find out about the affair. She had another affair with my soccer coach when I was 10, which led to my parents' divorce later that year, and blamed me for it. All of her wrongdoings, she would blame me for, and now it all makes sense. She's a really messed up woman. I'm not on speaking terms with her anymore, nor do I really care to meet my biological father. Maybe someday, but I'm not ready to. My relationship with my dad has never been better and that's all I really care about. I'm really glad your relationship with your dad is so great, Red Heart. Me too. He's such an amazing man and the best dad ever. She had another affair with my soccer coach when I was 10, which led to my parents' divorce, and blamed me for it. If you hadn't wanted to play soccer, I never would have sucked that dong.